Hello and welcome to The Big Debate on S3, SABC News Channel 404, YouTube and TikTok. My name is Thembekile Mrototo. It is the day after the national elections in South Africa, and we have a very different big debate for you. Today, we take a moment to pause and reflect on what kind of future we might wake up to once the votes have been counted. Will 2024 be our 1994, the dawn of a totally new moment in the history of our democracy? Or have South Africans voted for continuity? What have we learned from the past, for instance, from the rise and fall of previous leaders? Today, we look back at big debate shows over the years to see how much things have actually changed. Now, for this trip down memory lane, I'm joined by acclaimed author Qaanitah, journalist Ayanda Sishi-Wigzell, political commentator Jamie Mighty, black consciousness activist Jackie Shandu, and Lexi, aka Sunny Bunny Honey on TikTok, and Zethu Gqola, who's a commentator and marketing guru. We also have with us Bothale Nompumelelo, an activist and social media commentator. Welcome to you all. To kick us off, let's rewind to 2009. That was 15 years ago. Thabo Mbeki had just been recalled as president. Jacob Zuma was the newish leader of the ANC. The opposition parties were the DA, led by Helen Zille, and the newly founded COPE, which was led by Musiwalekota, Mbazi Mashilowa, and Alan Busak. The big debate was broadcast live from Qaanitah in Cape Town. Take a look.
We're discussing the elections.
I've never seen someone with such beautiful hair. I know you have blown that hair for weeks. And Mr. Alan Busak, I had the opportunity to fly with you. When the ladies come with a trolley, they ask me, do you want chicken or cheese? But when we were on the SAA, they asked, you want dacha or mandrakes? Helen Zille, you were in our area and you're protesting against all the gangsters and the tick and all that, and you were toy-toying. I've never seen a white lady toy-toy the way you toy-toy. But to the ANC, I had my first xenophobic experience when I landed in Johannesburg. He says to me, no, you are lying, or you're Zimbabwean, or you're Nigerian, or I say, no, I'm an Olympian without a medal.
Does the ANC deserve another chance, or has their focus on protecting Zuma from corruption charges led them to take their eye off the ball? In Soweto,
how long have I registered for the RTP houses? 2000. I'm still living in my father's house.
Cape Town, of Mitchell's Plain, Jalima Smith's water supply has been cut off for 18 hours.
This meter's leaking. We want to ask Helen Zille to put one of this in her house.
Qaanitah, Gqola's shack burnt down when she was 7 months pregnant. When it caught fire again in December and there was no water to douse the flames, she led a protest against the IEC's voter registration drive.
I need to vote, I want to vote, I like to vote, but I don't know what to vote for.
Over these 15 years, no party has ever been able to do what the ANC has been able to do. It is the ANC government that has prioritized the Western Cape because of the neglect from the Democratic Alliance.
We in the Democratic Alliance inherited 227 shack settlements that were entirely unserviced from the ANC.
COPE has, since the 2 months that we have launched, really caused a wave of excitement throughout the country.
People like you from all sides, like we're the only non-racial party.
From the very beginning, COPE has presented itself as a party that believes in non-racialism as one of the pillars of our democracy.
The ANC stands for unity of South Africans, prosperity, non-racialism and diversity.
We're the most non-racial party in South Africa, and we get more black support than many other black-led parties in South Africa.
But people still vote for the ANC, they're not voting for you.
Well, people will soon learn, as they did in Zimbabwe, that corrupt leaders make poor people poorer.
Qaanitah, a lot of familiar faces. Helen Zille, Nompumelelo, Alan Busak. I think Patricia de Lille was also part of that panel. The problems sound very familiar. How much has actually changed over the last 15 years?
The haircuts of the politicians and their wrinkles. That has changed for sure. But superbly interesting that the tropes and the sound bites of the politicians have not changed. And it's You know, the DA is the most non-racial political party in South Africa. The ANC is the only hope. South Africa was a very different country 15 years ago. And so the 30-year democracy period where we are today is, that moment marks for me the break. The 15 years of progress and the 15 years of decline. And I think we're really well into the decline.
And Lexi, how do you feel seeing that?
I used to be in the DA, so I know all about their lies. There is sexism, racism. And seeing Helen Zille basically come forward and say, no, we're the most non-racial party when I was just a diversity hire, is a bit, it makes me uneasy.
What do you mean you were a diversity hire? Because when people talk about the DA, right, everyone reflects on that period where it was led by Helen Zille and a couple of other white leaders. Then there was the Lindiwe Mazibuko, Musi Maimane sort of period. And now people say it's gone back, in fact, to being a party that represents white South Africans. But they deny that, of course.
They deny that because there are actually so many people of color that believe in the DA because of how the ANC, the corruption within the ANC has just pushed them kind of away. So the DA seems like the last hope, but it's not, because I went into the DA thinking, I can finally be a part of something. I can be a part of a community. But coming out from it, I was so much more traumatized than anything.
And Zethu, that's a former DA member. You're from Cape Town.
Yes.
That debate happened in Cape Town in 2009. And when you drive through Cape Town today, it remains a city of two worlds, isn't it?
Absolutely. I noticed outside of the CBD, Camps Bay, Bantry Bay, Sea Point area, you don't get this poster. And this poster says the Western Cape works. In the areas of the Western Cape where the Western Cape is not working due to the DA, you're not finding those posters around. I don't think they've made much of a change.
And Ayanda, the DA has maintained its lead over the opposition in the Western Cape. How do you make sense of that?
What happened in the Western Cape in 2009 also was historical in and of itself, because you can't take away from the fact that Helen Zille was able to turn the province around. And so I can't take away from the fact that she actually did that, but also we need to take fault with the fact that she was saying that they have inherited the informal settlements, they have inherited the lack of service delivery.
I want to take that point and bring it to you, Jamie, because the suburbs look good, but you see the informal settlements, people still are living in communities riddled with crime. But it's not unique to the Western Cape. In Johannesburg, Sandton and Alexandra are almost the exact same thing. Are we harder on the DA than we are on the ANC?
I think the reason why people are harder on the DA is that they create this illusion that they're more genuine about dealing with this issue. So if you are genuine about dealing with those issues, why is it that the same inequalities replicate in the areas where you govern with the same discrepancies? That's really the challenge. You begin to see features of more inequality in the Western Cape than any other part of South Africa. Right now, there's no young professional who actually thinks that they can actually own property in Cape Town and live a quality of life if they don't have any heritage or ancestry that connects them to the people who originally colonized that space.
Jackie, Cope now, they're counted among the smallest, whereas they were top 3 15 years ago.
Right. There was no politically sound basis for that sort of breakaway. I think those were just cult followers of an individual, Mr. Thabo Mbeki, a self-confessed Thatcherite, neoliberal. It had nothing to do with really reversing patterns of coloniality, land ownership patterns, racialized inequalities, and it had absolutely nothing to do with that. And it's quite typical of the native political elite in South Africa since 1994.
If you look back now at 2009 once more, millions of South Africans had high hopes for Jacob Zuma as the fairly new ANC president, but not everyone was convinced. Have a look.
Given the anti-women attacks and statements by the leadership of the African National Congress, including its president and the Youth League president, can we seriously say to the women of South Africa that they deserve the ANC's vote?
Sexual harassment, we stand against it. We need to give support to victims, but also give the alleged perpetrator an opportunity to present him or herself.
Does it help the ANC that somebody like Jacob Zuma, who's the leader of the party, has got all this cloud around him?
President Jacob Zuma, one of the things that he has
Hold on,
said
guys, hold on.
is that we are committing ourselves as the ANC, that we really want to change, we want to clean the mess that has been there.
Are you telling us that into the future, no more Imvumes, no more front companies, no more oil company scandals?
The president has said it. The ANC is committing itself that no politician will be involved in any acquisition or procurement of goods and services.
Fierce defense of the ANC from Nompumelelo, fierce defense of Jacob Zuma, how things have changed, right?
In my teenage years, when the Jacob Zuma rape trial was happening, what it taught me as a young girl was that there are going to be politicians who will forever protect their own interests versus actually protecting the people who are most vulnerable. No politician will ever take the plight of women seriously if this country set to put their ex against the head of a man who was charged with rape. Gender-based violence is not something that is taken seriously by politicians.
Qaanitah, Jacob Zuma, 15 years on, right? He was not convicted of rape. The ANC stood by him, defended him during that time, defended him during the Ngandla situation. There was also a fierce defense of Jacob Zuma during the time of the corruption allegations around the arms deal. Has it come back to bite the ANC?
Yeah, the ANC didn't realize that they're dealing with someone who will destroy everything around him for self-preservation. And so what they thought was that we'll all hold on to him and then he'll sort of fight for us and we'll benefit from it. So come 2024, Jacob Zuma's burning the ANC down. They thought in 2018 that they could just sort of remove him and then the ANC will rebuild after those 9 years.
Bothale, a lot of young people who will be voting, in fact, for the first time this year feel it's a bit of a joke, right? That it's the same characters, same stories. Do you agree?
We're all awestruck at just how there's no option at this point. The system that we've inherited from the apartheid regime is the problem. The townships that were there are still here today. A lot of people don't even have any heritage to the places that they were forcefully displaced from. They only know township, they only know poverty, they only know suffering. So as a first-time voter, and I think much of the other youth feels this as well, we are just lost. We don't see a future for us, and we are still going to be expected to take responsibility for it.
It's really heartening and encouraging in some sense to speak to a young person who demonstrate a very thorough and accurate sense of history and how history impacts the present. Because if you uncritically consumed the poison, especially of white corporate media in South Africa, you would be forgiven for concluding that the ANC is the problem. And this is just so nauseating, more so because of the perpetuation and the deepening of colonial and apartheid inequities in the past 30 years. South Africa has become more unequal. If I may finish, please. The white minority, followed by Indians, have amassed more wealth than they did throughout the duration of apartheid.
Right.
Black people are the only race group, if we stick to apartheid racial classification, who have become poorer under democracy.
Whose fault is that?
Primarily, it is the fault of the white capitalist establishment because of its parasitic and racist arrangement with the ANC, which was corrupted through the CODESA process. The South African branch of international white racism, white power, and white capitalist structure muzzled the ANC out of its founding principles and objectives: return of the land, reparations for colonialism and apartheid, and redistribution of power, wealth, and resources to create a truly non-racist, and prosperous society.
I agree with what he says, that a lot of the times we are so hyper-focused on the corruption of the ANC and the deterioration of South Africa over the last 30 years. But how were they able to get away with things? If they had inherited a law that held people accountable, they would be held accountable.
The ANC says it's trying to clean itself up, and that takes time. Should we cut them some slack?
No.
No.
Laughing. No. Why are you laughing?
Because it's ridiculous. It's yeah.
The myth of the 9 years and the wasted years and all of that jazz is one that is quite funny. You know, as a kid, I used to collect all the Zapiro cartoons, and I can remember scandals dating back to, I think, Sarafina 2. Then there was this narrative that, no, now the good guy is coming in, the billionaire. I'm just saying.
When we come back, we'll try to lighten the mood, hopefully, when we fast forward to 2015. This is The Big Debate. Welcome back to this special episode of The Big Debate. We're looking back at elections and politicians from our past. Some of them are ghosts who still haunt us. In 2015, Jacob Zuma was president. The DA had its first black leader, Mmusi Maimane. The economic freedom fighters had burst onto the scene and already had been thrown out of parliament for disrupting the president's address. And the ANC was starting to backtrack, if you will, on charging e-tolls for road users.
The generational shift in South African politics is something that we believe we're championing the way forward for, a mixture of ideas. I think South Africans are already paying for the road infrastructure by using the fuel levy.
The ANC in 2015 get to be told by the DA that.
Why don't we have cabinet? Our cabinet is the largest.
Mr. Vavi, what's your thing?
First is Ngandla. The statement by the Minister of Police, Nathi Nhleko, on the repayment of the money spent on Nkandla is a disgrace move to dodge taking responsibility.
I heard it for the first time that the minister said this. I don't agree with it. So it's not an ANC position.
No. Oh, no, I want to understand Nkandla because basically Jacob Zuma said the Minister of Police must tell him whether to pay back the money, and then the Minister of Police is waiting for Jacob Zuma to tell him whether to tell him. It's like the CEO of Edgar's forgot there's Edgar's account and then was dodging calls from himself.
The EFF is an organization that continues to make us very proud. Paul belongs to that elite group that continues to milk our resources. Killing for Zuma was an emphatic statement. When a person is dressed smart, you say, today you are dressed to kill. It doesn't mean that person is well armed. We are going to take the land, and that is going to be done through legislation and not through violent means. We're not going to disrupt any residential arrangement, and all those owning big chunk of land, they will have to reapply to the state.
Lexi, I want to come to you. You and Mmusi shared a political home. When you watch that now, do you go, I shame Mmusi? Or do you go, thank goodness he's free?
I'm glad he's free, but also a shame, because there was a point that he was believing everything that he stands for. He still has those principles. He lives for neoliberalism. And he knew he was being used as a puppet by the DA, and he wanted to carve out a space for himself.
Mostly a product of white capital. In fact, Tony Leon, he was not even shy to say to us, a project gone wrong. And it says a lot about how white people view black humanity and black agency.
Some of his ideas do have value, like his ideas around education. I think we have to give him some credit for some of the fights that he's fought. He doesn't get enough. A lot of South Africans believed in what the DA was offering when they diversified with Lindiwe Mazibuko, when Helen Zille was out there with the pods trying to make boykies or bonda ipap or whatever the case was. Many people thought, hey, this is a viable alternative to the ANC. Let me give them a chance.
It wasn't genuine. They just looked for a cover. And so they tried it with Lindiwe. It didn't work. They tried it as far back as Patricia de Lille. By that time, we had 3-4 examples. People said to Mmusi, hey, we know what this thing is. He didn't want to believe it.
The DA realized it had reached its electoral ceiling with the white vote, still committed to perpetuation of white supremacy and white privilege. And you just needed some black people to play the game.
I will give him the credit. For me, it just felt like he was built in a lab.
Oh, wow, built in a lab. Ayanda, let's talk about the EFF.
Yes, those are really interesting times, especially when Julius Malema was expelled from the ANC Youth League and up to the formation of the EFF, including him saying that he was going to kill for Jacob Zuma, and even going far back as saying disparaging remarks about the victim who was involved in the rape trial, saying that she stayed for breakfast. So we must never forget those utterances when we are talking about these political leaders. When the EFF came into Parliament, all of a sudden nobody was sleeping in Parliament anymore. Remember, we had that pandemic of people literally just taking big old naps in portfolio committee meetings. And so I will thank the EFF for bringing in and breathing new life.
Being a booster shot.
Yes, being a booster shot.
At the time, not
at the time, but not anymore. Looking now at where the EFF is, I'm very disappointed. I'm not going to lie. What I see on paper is not what is being put out in terms of what their policies are, the outfits that they wear, the domestic worker, the miner. Politicians themselves earn quite a significant amount of money. They're never going to be in that class. We know for a fact that Julius Malema is not living the reality of a miner.
Jamie,
He's cosplaying it.
Is the EFF cosplaying?
No, I don't think so. I think it does send a message. You know, my mother was this, my father was this. That's why.
While I wear Gucci shoes.
While I wear Gucci shoes.
So,
while I wear Louis
I don't hold it against any black person to have affluent toys, whatever the case may be, because it's aspirational.
Why is the scrutiny? You'll never hear this kind of discussion about white politicians. You don't know John Steenhuisen, what he spends and what he does.
He also, though, doesn't say that his life mirrors that of the people.
But neither does Julius. Julius doesn't say that.
But he does wear an overall.
They are trying to send a message to a particular constituency that we're here to fight for you. They know that he drives an affluent car, that he lives in an affluent neighborhood. And to a degree, we have to give him credit. There's very few people fighting for land to return to the dispossessed masses of South Africa.
The real question is, has the EFF reached a plateau? People like new rhetoric, and that's what Julius Malema gave. But look at the performance of the EFF in councils. Dismal. As an opposition party, EFF councillors don't show up to work. Look at the objective data in terms of the EFF participation in portfolio committees. Not great.
Dismal.
It's dismal. They are in government in eKuruleni. We must never forget that. They are in government in eThekwini. What is the state of eThekwini now? And
it's a mess.
It's a mess. And so I am interested in seeing whether South Africans are still attracted by the talk and not the walk.
Bothale.
Conversations where we are pinpointing in terms of ethos of the political leaders won't lead us to a place where we have real solutions to work with, because political leaders are given the platform to be corrupt through the system. It may be that Julius is the best option for us. He's here to fundamentally change the structure that we've inherited.
In 2015, it was a year of xenophobic attacks, what others have in fact said we should term as Afrophobic attacks. And politicians were already blaming foreigners and NGOs for their failings. In fact, they seem willing to blame anyone other than themselves for the crises.
Our country needs vibrant and dynamic civil society organizations and activists. That if NGOs spend their whole time bringing court cases against government, then money is wasted on lawyers.
It should be worrying if the Deputy Minister of Justice comes here and says the continued use of the courts by civil society is a problem. We use the courts because the courts are currently the only arm of government that is willing to listen to the poor.
I am seething with anger. The fact that history is repeating itself again. Umsindiso building. What happened months before Umsindiso building? There were NGOs that went and had to defend people who were illegally evicted. Why is that? Because our government has failed to provide housing under Section 26, which they are obligated to do in terms of the Constitution. This notion that NGOs are the problem in this country needs to end right now, because NGOs are currently filling the gap where government is failing.
Why is it so tense between government, NGOs, and the third element, foreign nationals?
This reminds me of that male best friend situation. And most times boyfriends are jealous of the male best friend because he's doing the minimum that they were supposed to do. He's checking how the day is. He's doing. The NGOs sometimes frustrate government by doing the bare minimum that they were meant to do, but they chowed the money. And now they're being exposed for failing to even do that. Now, there's an interesting question around the diversification of the South African demographic, and part of that comes from the wave of immigration we've seen out of Zimbabwe, out of Mozambique. Politicians have been, I'm going to blame these guys and win an election, and it worked for Trump.
Where is the voice of these so-called NGOs in the most principal and fundamental contradiction in South Africa today, which is the land question? And in terms of the most recent land audit, we know that an 8% white minority owns 72% of all farmland in this country. We know that less than 3% Indian minority own more land than more than 80% African majority. I would think that that is where the NGO work should begin. Secondly, white capital creates an ally in this NGO space, because that's where the money comes from. And that's why the NGOs will always be limited to scrutinizing and criticizing government.
I do want Ayanda, who spoke about the role of the NGOs, to respond to the questions. Where are the NGOs on the issue of land, the issue of inequality?
Oxfam does inequality.
There are organizations that deal with the question of land and inequality. There are NGOs such as the Funukwazi, which are existing, yes, which do amazing work, and they are a predominantly young organization as well, and they are predominantly black organization where they are dealing
with... Do they confront white privilege?
Yes.
White farms, white commercial farms?
Yes.
The Rupettes, the Oppenheimers, do they march to the Oppenheimers and the Rupettes?
But why must they
Jackie,
do one
please
way
can you
of...
just allow me to finish, because you also wanted to be protected during your time, so please can you respect me with mine?
Sure.
Thank you very much. Sure. Everywhere where money comes from, we need to critique, but we also have got to critique why it is that it is necessary to fill in these gaps by the NGO. The government has failed. There are failures here. Government cannot do it alone. You need to have civic organization.
Let me come in here. When we come back, we'll talk about the issue of land, which has already come up. This is the big debate. Welcome back to the big debate. By the municipal elections in 2016, the EFF had captured public attention with their calls for land redistribution and occupation in some areas. The ANC was playing catch-up and the DA was not convinced. Herman Mashaba was about to be elected mayor of Johannesburg. Have a look at what was going on 8 years ago.
When elections come, everybody who's over 18 is like the hot girl at the bar. The name's C. ANC. The land is mine, you need to give it up, no compensation, it belongs to us. Helen Zilla had a little meeting with Mambili Rambili from Mafon to be the presidential candidate, to be the black face for the Democratic Alliance. Because the thing about South Africa, it matters if you're black or white.
A young person asks, what about the land?
Yeah. A lot of our people today been living in this city for the last 50, 60 years. I'm going to really speed up giving them real title deeds to their properties.
Title deeds are the people who have got land occupied. The people in Johannesburg do not have land at all now.
Thank you very much.
Pax's forces evicted people from Stretla.
We are preventing land invasion by a particular party that's initiated in Stretla.
It's the first time that we got to have full agreement between Jackie and Ayanda. They even shared a laugh. But on the issue of land, the black majority is still in informal settlements or RDP houses.
Sometimes I think that the only way is if we use violence the way that it was acquired,
Right.
because it seems as though for as long as the people who benefit largely from this inequality are still here or able to access these resources, for as long as they are able to have influence on the economy here, the politics, we will have that threat of the inequality continuing and nobody getting access to this land.
Is it not just about implementing the legislation, because it is there and has been there for a while?
We tried in 1994. Legislation has been there. to segregate for longer than we've had this freedom.
Jackie, you're nodding, but an armed struggle over land seems a dangerous idea in today's South Africa, democracy, doesn't it?
We abhor violence. We don't want violence. There should be no violence. I think it's just raising a logical point that seemingly the mass dispossession that happened, the institutions, the democratic experiment is proving to be too weak to be able to have both the will and capacity. I mean, there was a time, Thabo Mbeki, he had a 2/3 majority. He had the opportunity to pass legislation in parliament, bring back the land wrongfully taken from the African majority.
Lexi, another story of missed opportunities?
The current dispensation is built foundationally on apartheid and colonialism. I think no matter what you try and build on this foundation, it is going to fall because we never fixed the problems back in 1994. We took the easy way out. We said, you know what, we're going to forgive them. Did Black South Africans actually forgive white people? That's the question.
Right.
They weren't given the opportunity to actually take back what was theirs. And I think if we're able to give that opportunity to Black people, we should.
Qaanitah, is the solution to demolish if the foundation is not steady?
Yeah, I don't know. Do you just break the house down, build, and remain homeless, and then fix the foundation, or do you kind of try to keep the wall stable and fix the foundation a step at a time?
That's what the ANC has been trying to do. But anything that they build on this unstable foundation, it has slanted the entire building.
But maybe the building process was also corrupted and sort of compromised. So maybe that's also the issue. I'm not saying the foundation is not unstable. It is unstable. What I'm trying to say is, what do you do? What do? You just break the house down and say, right, we're starting from scratch. And then how do we foolproof that process from opportunists who broke the building of the walls to not try to repoison the foundation again?
What is building from scratch?
We need to go back to the drawing board of the original plan, which was written down by Z.K. Matthews. Give the land back to the people that it belongs to. That is the base plan. And I think if Section 25 was implemented, when it was supposed to be implemented, the foundation would have been there. We need to start from scratch. And I'm with you on the fact that there definitely need to be social protections in place to make sure that those who are the most vulnerable and are protected against this. And this is what comes in with ethical leadership. The problem that I have is that the people who are picking up their hands to say that I want to take up the baton to do this task are people who should not be doing
Why are white people refusing to give up
Yes,
their
because it
ill-gotten
works.
land and wealth?
Because it works. And because there are Black people who are in bed with them, and those Black people are also benefiting from those white people staying in that system, the status quo is going to remain the same. And this is what I'm saying, in that we need to, there is where the infection is.
Two agreements in one show. We're making progress.
Regalia Bam, how is it possible that parties can nominate convicted criminals or those who are facing criminal charges on their councillors' parties list?
Unless we have a legal system that we set for each and every party, that each and every party follows that process.
I think one of the processes that make us even more unhappy is our inability to have any say about who appears on those lists.
As the ANC, we commit that at least 50% of the candidates of the ANC are women. At least 20% of those candidates are young people, so that the youth can have a voice.
Will the time come where you guide all the political parties will work together?
We do not have problems with coalitions.
Coalitions, Qaanitah, why are they a mess now?
They're a mess because political parties are not learning the lesson that voters are teaching them, which is get your house in order. And so what happens with coalition is that it's seen as a power grab opportunity. Small political parties becoming massive kingmakers, it's fundamentally undemocratic.
Can we afford one at national level? Because
we don't have a
that
choice.
is one of the potential scenarios.
It's going to happen whether we like it or not. The thing is, we've not foolproofed the systems from the lessons that we learned in local government. The reality of it is single-seat parties can become kingmakers, and that's dangerous.
Jamie, I want to talk to you about parties and keeping the corrupt out, i.e. what we saw come out of the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. Why then are people who were named in those reports still on some of these lists?
Because they're influential, because they're powerful, because they're power brokers in the parties. Unfortunately, we're still dealing with allegations instead of dealing with criminal cases which are going through the process. And I think the NPA has been overwhelmed. The removal of the Scorpions as an entity in and of itself weakened the whole infrastructure. So we really need to think about there being quicker prosecutions for these type of allegations, and also for us to find other mechanisms to remove those people from lists. Because this whole system of just saying, no, we're going to deal with it at the Integrity Commission, perhaps we need to move to that European standard where as soon as there is a scandal associated with your name, there's a lot of pressure from the
What are the
media.
chances, though,
I mean,
of the sort of resignation where the story breaks on Monday and by Friday, the person falls on their sword?
I'm pointing out the ideal in this scenario, not to say that the European standards are always ideal, but I've seen there that whenever there's a scandal and it's building up momentum, the journalists start asking you, when are you going to step down? And the public starts asking you, when are you going to step down? They don't just say, no,
There's
let's
probably
see
a
what
higher
happens.
chance of me becoming a swimsuit model if that happens. And I mean, hello. Don't go away. Thanks for staying with us on this special edition of The Big Debate. Still looking back at elections over the years. Let's go back to 2019. State capture had been exposed and the ANC appeared to be splintering. But the opposition was also falling apart with an exodus of black leaders from the DA. Our last elections debate in that year featured a discussion between some of the top thinkers in the country about the problem with politics. We dedicate this clip to the memory of the late Eusebius Mkhize.
If we can get a good leader who can start rebuilding institutions, then we have one. Cyril's our best hope.
Max tells us that the best way to keep the ANC on its toes is to have a competitive political system, but then he wants to reinforce their power by voting for them.
If people are going to still bank on the history of the ANC, Tata Mandela and all those things, he himself said to us, if you think ANC is doing what apartheid did to you, do to them what you did to apartheid.
Since the birth of EFF into the political arena, a lot has changed. Corruption has been unveiled.
There are VBS ghosts that they must answer. And their leader collapsed a province called Limpopo, Julius Malema, right? Must not forget that.
If you are serious about getting rid of misogyny, of getting rid of homophobia, if you want to rid our politics of militancy, you can't be okay with the EFF. If you want economic policies that have been properly costed, that won't bankrupt us, you can't vote EFF. But let's go to the DA. If you are serious about racial justice and the black experience, you can't vote for them. What South African voters want is an alternative to the ANC that speaks into our experience of inequality, exclusion from the economy, and deep racial wounds that haven't been healed just because we had a TRC 20 years ago.
Well, after watching that, is the problem the ANC or an opposition that simply does not have the ideas to turn things around and bring the change they say we so desperately need? Zethu?
I think it's both, you know. It was discussed earlier on. It's the fact that the opposition parties like the EFF have been given the opportunity to show what they can do. And then, as she mentioned, they don't show up to work. The areas are poorly run. The ANC right now is a big, big part of the problem. We are in the worst years right now with them.
Are these the worst years, Qaanitah?
Objective metrics. Children under the age of 10 years old, 81% cannot read for meaning. So for all the 15 years of gains, you're now receding on objective metrics, whether it's access to water, electricity, etc. Yes, you have a good story to tell from the apartheid story, but what happens in terms of the recession about the state institutions? And it's the Cyril Ramaphosa moment of reckoning, which is the reforms did not meet up with the decline. So you promised reforms, but you did not institute it. By that time, South Africa was already off the cliff. And that's why you see the unemployment figures, the inequality figures, and the poverty levels increasing. And you're not going to see a difference. Why? Because the reforms, when it was promised, was the right time to intervene. And now it's too late.
So, Jackie, if you've got that laundry list of failures, right, by the current government, you'd think the opposition would be able to score an easy victory. Why has it not come together for them?
Maybe the perceived lack of integrity. And I think that, especially in black political parties, I speak as a black consciousness adherent. Most of the problems in this country afflict disproportionately black people broadly, Africans in particular. We are looking for a viable alternative, but that is credible in terms of values, in terms of ethics, in terms of morals. As your clip was showing, it was disheartening to see the EFF being accused of having also participated in more or less the same kind of corruption scandals that the ANC has been riddled with since 1994.
Prince Mashele was pointing to the VBS scandal, in which even the Deputy President, Floyd Chivambu of the EFF, it was said that there were monies allegedly funneled through relatives of his, but ultimately he was involved. So does that not deserve as much scrutiny?
Of course it does, you know. If you're going to put yourself out there and you say you want to be a representative of the people, you have to pass the ethical test, you have to pass the decency test, you have to pass the morality test. The reality is, it's a small minority of politicians across the board. However, beyond that, even if you had the most decent, the most ethical and moral politicians, if they are not alive to the systemic, structural, historic antagonisms and contradictions, which is white racism and white supremacy, which reflects mainly the white economic privilege. If you don't do anything with that structure, you can be the most decent. I can think of Kenneth Mesho, ACDP. I've never had any scandal being associated to him, but he practices horrible, bad politics. That is also not going to help us.
To some voters, protests seemed more powerful than the polls at some point in this country. Have a look at how that journey has played itself out.
We've been talking to young people across this country, and young people are saying two things about the vote. They're saying, number one, we don't understand the electoral system as a start. But the second important thing that they're saying is, when I vote, I don't get a response. So when I protest, I get a response. But we're not getting to a point where our vote is meaningful.
Government and parliament is patriarchal itself. So for me, unless the system changes fundamentally, women in South Africa are on their own.
How do we address all of that, Ayanda?
There is no doubting that Tessa Domes is absolutely correct in saying that people doubt the power of the vote. It is evident in the way that our protests are conducted. It is evident in the way that our protests are met with violent acts. When we are looking at conflict, right, there are perceived differences. So in the community, because they want to have a library is built, but because that library is built by a government that does not represent them, to them, that entity and that institution represents something that is not of them. And so it is easy then to say that instead of going to my municipal office because they've already done that, instead of going to my councillor because they've already done that, and they've been and as Tessa Domes said, they're rightfully ignored, then the next the next step in the process of conflict is then we are going to be met with violence, and then once that violence is reciprocated by even more violence, and then change comes after that, what it says to society is that this is the way to go. We have a history of this in apartheid during the townships, when there was the boycotts of paying for rates because our apartheid government was not actually was not delivering the services that they were meant to be delivering, even though there was money allocated to that corruption. This is what led to protests, and so that culture then was perpetuated by our government not responding to the people and the problems on the ground. Even though there is women representation in parliament, it does not mean that women are not being raped every day. It does not mean that children are not starving and dying of hunger. Just because there are women in parliament, it does not mean that that representation has to be something that is tangible and has to be something that is real and true.
Bothale, how do we do that? How do we deconstruct a patriarchal, gendered legislature?
I mean, it goes back to what we see ourselves as humans. What do we need? Do we prioritize our emotional, psychological, spiritual, as well as our physical needs? A lot of the time, because we are severely traumatized by the system, we only see the physicality of, I need food, I need water, I need a bed, I need basic needs met. And so we don't have the other parts of our humanity nurtured and nourished, and we don't have the capacity to allow people to exist the way that they want to, because they are not even able to focus on those other parts that need nourishing. a poor person who is only thinking about food will never think about gender representation, the fact that they have to take or do whatever means necessary to get their food, and that will require a lot of violence a lot of the time, crime, rape. Those things are the things that people are used to in terms of how to get resources. So it starts from the fundamental basis of how do you view your humanity and what you require to survive.
When we return, we'll get a last word from our panel. You're still watching a special edition of The Big Debate. You're still with The Big Debate, looking back on South African politics over the years. And as votes, in fact, have been counted, what kind of future can we expect for this country? Does anyone have the vision to run South Africa? What about the role of ordinary citizens? Let's have a last word then from our guests. Bothale, I'll start with you.
I think a lot of the ordinary citizens are feeling quite hopeless. And so at the same time, we also do need a lot of work to be done on the ground, because many of us have realized nobody's coming to save us. Everyone who comes in to say, we're going to do this, it's sensationalized. It's just so that they can get influence, votes, whatever it may be. So a lot of us are having to turn to one another to start building community networks together, or to at least be able to sustain ourselves. We have to know that we can rely on ourselves. So citizens are at a point where they're saying, some of them might not vote because of this reason. It's like, nobody's coming to save us anyways. Sure. Let's just do it ourselves.
Jamie, do we save ourselves?
Well, I think we do, and we have to, because not only are politicians imperfect, but there are trends in the world with AI, with China pushing its industrialization strategy down our throats, and a variety of things, which mean that politicians can't be your only solution. And if you're waiting for your child to learn how to read, they will become one of the 81% if you think it's going to happen in a classroom. But I'm still very excited about South Africa as a democratic project, because there was no violence. People were able to have debates like this, shout at politicians, nobody got arrested. People can insult the president, and nothing will happen to them. And I think South Africa remains a beacon of democracy in Africa, where most of the democracies are either shams or have deteriorated to the point where juntas have to take over.
Zethu?
You did ask earlier, do we think that these people have the capabilities to transform South Africa?
Right.
On paper they do. Ethically, I don't know if so much. But I also think it goes back to empowering ourselves as citizens, understanding how government, municipalities and things like that work, so that we can also have a greater sense of power and say beyond just the presidential elections.
Jackie?
I think we need to come to terms with the ideological and conceptual limitations of constitutional democracy as a thing that has been more or less imposed on South Africa by our erstwhile invaders and oppressors. It has its inherent systemic limits, and we are trying to stretch it beyond what it is capable of providing for us. And we're not being honest with that. We need to envision a new way of being, at the center of which will be about shared prosperity, real redistribution, and an environment where color, sex, sexuality, gender, class become weak as markers of how long you're going to live, where you're going to live, what your quality of life will be.
Okay. Lexi, you were nodding?
I agree so much with what Jackie said. I think currently our political system attracts so many power-hungry, greedy individuals that get paid millions upon millions. I think we need to kind of reduce that amount and actually look in terms of amending legislation to allow only specific people to actually become politicians.
Ayanda?
There is power in information. And I implore South Africans, if you are lucky enough to have a library in your community, because our government is inept at that, then, go to your libraries, find out information for yourselves, because I'm telling you right now, politicians are a wily bunch, and they will use information in order to manipulate people to think that they are the ones that are going to save this country. But at the end of the day, you are the only one who can save yourself. And I believe in a constitutional democracy.
Qaanitah?
I think that the constitutional democracy as we know it is imperfect, but it's the best we have, and we can never, ever forget that the expensive price of this constitutional democracy. It may have its limitations, it may have its failures, but it is the best we have, and any consideration to do away with this constitutional democracy and this fabric of the society is to insult the thousands of South Africans who gave their lives for this particular ideal that we enjoy, and we have this debate in that context.
Guys, thank you so much for being here and taking part in this special edition of The Big Debate. We voted, the future is decided. All that remains is to hear who will form the next government. Can we look forward to a brighter future, perhaps? Well, you decide, or you have decided. Next week, we'll look at race and racism in South Africa over the years, and our live shows will resume on June 13th, just before Youth Day. Thank you for watching The Big Debate. Goodbye. Did you guys have a good time, though?
Really enjoyed it. Yeah.